Pittsburgh, 1924. Point Breeze wakes under a haze of limestone dust, the kind that hangs in the air long after the hammers stop. The rhythmic crash of sledgehammers drowns the morning traffic, echoing off stone that once shimmered with pride. A group of workers moves in unison, cold, deliberate, tearing down what was once hailed as the architectural jewel of Pennsylvania. But this isn't urban renewal. This isn't a fire cleanup. This is an execution. They are dismantling Green Lawn, the personal palace of Henry John Heinz, the man whose name is printed on millions of bottles across the world. Stone by stone, they bring down the chateau-style walls that were supposed to last for centuries. Stained glass imported from Europe shatters into dust. Hand-carved oak panels, once the pride of craftsmen, now lie in broken heaps, fuel for a bonfire. To onlookers, it isn't just demolition, it's contradiction in motion. The Heinz empire is thriving, factories roaring, profits soaring into the millions. Yet the family home, the empire's heart, is being torn apart not by enemies or debt, but by his own heirs. The demolition order bears 3 signatures: Howard, Clifford, and Irene Heinz, the blood children of the ketchup king himself. Just 5 years earlier, in 1919, inside one of those gilded bedrooms, Henry Heinz had taken his final breath. He believed he was leaving behind more than fortune, a legacy, a fortress that would shelter generations to come. But what he saw as a family castle, his children saw as a burden. They called it a white elephant, beautiful, colossal, and utterly useless. They tried to donate it to the city. They tried to hand it over to charities. No one wanted it. Even free, the mansion was too expensive to keep alive. Heating it, maintaining its 30 rooms, feeding its endless appetite for money, unthinkable in the new economy. The palace that symbolized one man's triumph became the tombstone of his obsession. The irony of fate is merciless. Across the Allegheny River, the red brick Heinz factory stands unshaken, its smokestacks piercing the gray sky like monuments to progress. It will survive depressions, wars, and the slow death of the industrial age. But the one place where Henry Heinz was not a titan, where he was simply a man, is vanishing before the city's eyes. Under the clang of crowbars, his private Eden crumbles. Within weeks, only a wrought iron fence and a lonely carriage house will remain where the estate once stood. The rest, divided into parcels, sold off to developers, erased like it never existed. The empire endures, but the man disappears. Only the name, Heinz, survives. But why did his own children destroy their father's dream? To answer that, we have to travel back half a century, to the soot-choked streets of Pittsburgh in 1844, a city writer James Parton would soon call hell with the lid taken off. Days and nights blur in the smoke of coal furnaces. Snow turns gray before it hits the ground. The air reeks of sulfur and molten iron, and in this inferno, inside the home of strict German Lutherans Frederick and Margareta Heinz, a child is born who will one day try to build a paradise under glass. Henry John Heinz was no aristocrat. He wasn't born into old money or Ivy League circles. His empire would begin on just 4 acres of garden soil in Sharpsburg, where, at 8 years old, he packed vegetables instead of playing games. By 12, he was pushing a cart through muddy streets, selling produce to neighbors. But there was one detail that set young Henry apart from every other farmer's son: glass. In the mid-19th century, America's food industry was a swamp of deceit. Flour padded with plaster, cocoa mixed with brick dust, horseradish diluted with turnips. Producers hid their lies behind dark, opaque bottles. The buyer couldn't see the fraud until it was too late. Henry Heinz shattered that darkness, literally. He began selling his mother's grated horseradish in clear glass jars. It was risky, expensive, and revolutionary. Transparent glass screamed, "I have nothing to hide." It wasn't just marketing, it was moral conviction. Heinz believed purity should be visible. That obsession with clarity, light, and visible integrity would later shape his mansion, Green Lawn, a house built almost entirely around sunlight. But before he could build his empire of glass, he had to be broken first. The United States reels from the panic of 1873. Banks fail, industries collapse, and Henry's first company, Heinz & Noble, goes under. For a man raised in stern Lutheran discipline, bankruptcy isn't financial ruin, it's moral death. In that century, a failed businessman was treated like a thief, and then came the final humiliation, arrest. December 1875. Accused of fraud, Henry Heinz is taken into custody. The charges vanish quickly, but the damage doesn't. Newspapers mock him. Neighbors avert their eyes. He loses everything: home, furniture, reputation. In his diary, he writes words soaked in despair. Yet from that humiliation, something harder than glass begins to form. He writes a list, a personal ledger of every creditor, every debt, every name. He calls it his book of moral debts. The law says he owes them nothing, but Henry vows to repay them all. He works like a man possessed. 18-hour days. Managing his relatives' small business under their name, since his own is tainted. He invents, experiments, refines, turning food preservation into a science. By 1890, every debt is paid, and Henry Heinz stands among Pittsburgh's richest men. But the boy who once sold vegetables is gone. What remains is a strategist, a man who has learned that honesty alone doesn't win respect. Power does. He no longer wants to be trusted. He wants to be remembered, and for that, he'll need to build something the world can never forget. For Henry Heinz, architecture became a weapon, a way to design a perfect world where chaos couldn't reach him. He began traveling through Europe, walking the corridors of French chateaux and English manors, absorbing the language of stone and symmetry. He didn't want a home. He wanted a monument, proof to every banker who'd humiliated him and every neighbor who once whispered behind his back that Henry Heinz had not only survived, he had conquered. He chose Point Breeze, Pittsburgh's district of old money, the Olympus of the city's industrial gods. Westinghouse, Frick, Carnegie, their mansions lined the tree-shaded avenues. Most of them looked down on the man who sold pickles and ketchup. Heinz decided to live among them, not as their equal, but as their correction. He would build something they couldn't ignore. The plan for Green Lawn was already alive in his mind, a fortress of stone and glass, a museum of history that he would purchase piece by piece from Europe. Tapestries, vases, royal furniture. The son of immigrants would buy the heritage denied to him by birth. But unlike the Gatsbys of his age, Heinz wasn't chasing champagne or applause. He wanted reverence. He dreamed of a sanctuary where soot and shame could not pass through the glass. There was, however, one element even he couldn't command: time. The moment he signed the deed for the Point Breeze estate in 1892, the clock began ticking toward the quiet tragedy that would hollow out his triumph. To understand Green Lawn, you must first understand the marriage it was built upon. In Pittsburgh's world of magnates, wives were often ornaments, living proof of status wrapped in silk and lace. But Sarah Sally Sloane Young was different. She wasn't a trophy, she was Henry's foundation. They married in 1869. She came from a respected Scottish-Irish Presbyterian family, a social elevation for a German immigrant's son. But that wasn't what defined them. Sally had what Henry lacked: calm, steady emotional gravity. When bankruptcy crushed him in 1875, it was Sally who sat by his bed while he drowned in shame. She didn't scold or pity him. She spoke of rebuilding. Their marriage fused two temperaments, German drive and British composure, and from that fusion, the Heinz empire began to spin. By the 1890s, with debts repaid and the Heinz brand spreading across continents, they made their move. The north side of Pittsburgh, their old neighborhood, was a furnace of soot and steel. Henry loved the factory, but not for his family. He wanted air, light, safety. In 1892, he purchased the estate in Point Breeze, a statement as loud as a factory whistle. "We are equals now." Yet in typical Heinz fashion, he refused to erase the past. Instead of demolishing the old mansion on the property, he had it jacked up and moved deeper into the lot, then expanded around it. It was engineering poetry: preserve the best, improve the rest. That became his life's philosophy. Together, Henry and Sally planned not merely a house, but an enclosed world. It would have its own power plant in the basement, an air filtration system to keep out the city's soot, a labyrinth of pipes and vents controlling temperature with scientific precision. Victorian elegance fused with cutting-edge technology, a domestic utopia powered by innovation and faith. Letters from that era reveal a tenderness rare in the age of steel barons. Henry and Sally discussed wallpaper patterns, fireplace designs, garden paths. For them, green lawn wasn't about status. It was love translated into architecture. Sally dreamed of gardens where their children, Clarence, Clifford, Howard, and Irene, would play. Henry dreamed of walls strong enough to protect those dreams forever. While other magnates built palaces for banquets and headlines, the Heinz family built a fortress of retreat. They didn't crave society columns or champagne balls. Their Sundays belonged to church, not to spectacle. Green Lawn was conceived as a temple of family life, a sanctuary from noise and vanity. By 1893, the dream had shape. Scaffolding wrapped the mansion. Hundreds of workers carved its facades. Henry stood on the lawn beside Sally, watching their future rise from the earth. It seemed as though destiny had finally balanced its books, but tragedy was already writing its next line. At the peak of construction, as Green Lawn grew grander each day, Sally's health began to fail. The foundation of Henry's world developed a quiet, invisible crack. It was the cruel symmetry of fate. The moment the hero receives everything he ever wanted is the moment he begins to lose what made it worth wanting. The house built to echo with children's laughter would soon learn a different sound: silence, broken only by the ticking of hundreds of clocks Henry collected to keep time he could never reclaim. At the dawn of the 20th century, standing before Green Lawn's gates, you would first notice what Pittsburgh never had: clean air. Behind its wrought iron fence, the soot and clamor of the city stopped cold. Inside began the kingdom of control. This was not just an estate. It was Henry Heinz's autobiography, written in stone, glass, and wood. The chateau-style mansion rose 3 stories high, its roof bristling with turrets and chimneys. Over 30 rooms sprawled beneath that intricate skyline, but the true revelation waited inside. The heavy oak doors shut out Penn Avenue's noise, and the first thing that met you wasn't sight, it was scent, the soft perfume of beeswax, aged paper, and varnished wood. A world engineered to be perfect. A world already haunted by everything perfection could not save. Underfoot spread a mosaic so intricate it seemed alive, and above, a ceiling hand-painted in patient layers of color. Every detail whispered not of wealth, but of control. Green Lawn was no mere mansion. It was Henry Heinz's mind turned inside out. His obsession with purity and order had taken on walls and breadth. In a city where gas lamps blackened every ceiling, Heinz insisted on electricity in every corridor. He wanted no corners of shadow, no place where imperfection could hide. A visitor moving deeper into the house entered a sequence of rooms, each its own universe. The imperial room shimmered with French furniture upholstered in gold brocade, chosen by Heinz himself on trips to Paris. Silk walls caught the light like rippling water. Display cases lined the space, but not with dishes, with history. Green Lawn was less a home than a museum curated by a single relentless mind. He collected everything: ivory carvings from Asia and Africa, cabinets of mahogany filled with human craftsmanship. He could spend hours recounting the story of each artifact, every chisel mark, every tusk. But the most haunting collection was his clocks. Dozens of them. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, jeweled pocket timepieces from Switzerland, Germany, and England. Imagine the sound. The uneven ticking of hundreds of mechanisms echoing through polished halls. Once a week, a clockmaker came to win them all. For the man who had built an empire on precision and efficiency, these clocks were more than decoration. They were a defiance of chaos. He surrounded himself with time he could command, locked safely behind glass, forced to obey. From the dim library, heavy with the scent of vellum and oak, one stepped into the brightest heart of the estate, the winter garden. 10 greenhouses, each connected to the main house, formed a private Eden. Beneath glass domes, orchids bloomed and exotic fruits ripened, while outside, Pittsburgh snow turned gray in the smoke. Heinz, the boy who once sold vegetables from a wagon, had returned to the soil, but this time the earth was tamed. Plants stood in perfect rows, trimmed and ordered like jars of pickles on a factory shelf. Here he found what he thought was peace, the triumph of discipline over nature. Each morning before the factory, he inspected every leaf, searching for the smallest imperfection. Upstairs were 7 bedrooms, each with its own bath, an impossible luxury in the 1890s. Marble and porcelain concealed the plumbing as if cleanliness itself had been built into the architecture. Heinz believed purity of body produced purity of soul. The bathrooms gleamed like laboratories. One room stood apart, the music room. In its center, a full organ. On Sundays, its pipes filled the house not with gossip or laughter but with hymns. The Heinz family didn't chase society's applause. Their gatherings were closer to worship. The walls bore only landscapes and portraits, never nudes, never modernism, nothing that could challenge the stern Lutheran gaze. Green Lawn was meant to be a hive of virtue, a fortress for family. The dining hall, 30 seats of dark oak, waited for children's laughter, for silverware clinking against china. But look closely at old photographs and another story reveals itself. The rugs unrumpled. The furniture too precise. A perfection so total it freezes the air. Green Lawn, built as a hymn to life, already felt like a mausoleum. The rooms meant for Sarah Heinz, the queen of this castle, became chambers of absence. The psychology of the house shifted overnight, from a nest to a shrine. In 1894, as craftsmen laid gilding on stucco and gardeners planted rare roses, life itself slipped out through the cracks. Thanksgiving Day, November 29, 1894. Across Pittsburgh, tables were set and prayers rose with the steam of roasted turkeys. But inside Green Lawn, silence pressed against the walls, only hurried footsteps, muffled voices and the ticking of clocks. Outside, rain soaked the frozen ground. Inside, in one of those gleaming bedrooms designed for a lifetime of comfort, Sarah Heinz was dying. She is 51. The diagnosis: pneumonia. At the end of the 19th century, doctors called it the captain of the army of death. No antibiotics, no oxygen machines, no defense. For once, Henry Heinz's fortune means nothing. His factories thunder through the night. His name circles the globe. Yet inside his own house, he can do nothing but watch the shallow rise and fall of Sally's breath. The man who built an empire on control must now face the one process he can't manage. Death comes quickly. Days earlier, she had been arranging flowers, planning Christmas. Now, silence. For Henry, this isn't just loss, it's amputation. Sally was the keeper of his past, the only witness to the failure of 1875, the only one who saw the vulnerable dreamer beneath the empire. She was his moral compass. When that compass shattered, he drifted into open water. Green Lawn changes with her death. Before November 29th, it was a home. Afterward, it becomes a mausoleum. The air itself seems to harden. The gilded drawing rooms designed for laughter turn into theatrical sets for one man's solitude. From that moment, a contradiction takes root, one that defines Henry Heinz for the rest of his life. Instead of retreating into grief, he fills the emptiness with objects. His mild collector's habit mutates into obsession. If he cannot keep the living, he will preserve the dead. He scours the world, Egypt, Palestine, Europe, buying relics by the crate. Mummies arrive at the docks. Display cases multiply. Clocks, hundreds of them, mark the hours as though he could freeze them through sheer quantity. To surround himself with what had already outlived centuries was to imagine death itself could be negotiated. But there is a shadow in this pursuit. The father who once built Green Lawn as a refuge becomes a figure carved in stone. His children, Howard, Clifford, Irene, grow up in a museum, not a house. He leaves them letters of instruction, even when he's only a room away. His love is real but suffocating, like velvet drapes that never part. Outside those gates, America worships him. Henry Heinz, the benevolent industrialist, the man who banned soot and dirt from his factories, who gave workers showers, hot meals, manicure rooms. The reformer who championed the Pure Food and Drug Act, protecting a nation from poison. To the public, he is progress itself. Inside Green Lawn, the story reverses. The man who guards the nation's health cannot find warmth in his own house. Virtue becomes performance. Compassion turns clinical. Imagine being young Howard Heinz. Your father is a living monument. Your home, a gallery where nothing may be touched. Your mother exists only in portraits. Every move you make must honor the name cast in glass on factory doors. There is no space for error. No permission for humanity. Henry Heinz is no tyrant. He is sincere, devout, a leader in the global Sunday school movement, a man who believes goodness can be engineered, but his moral perfection freezes into doctrine. He builds a paradise, and in that paradise, the temperature never rises. The one woman who softened his edges is gone. Without Sally, Green Lawn becomes a golden cage, expanding endlessly as Henry adds new rooms, new greenhouses, new collections in a race against time itself. By the early 1900s, the mansion has become legend. Newspapers call it a palace. Guests marvel at the mosaics, the organ, the endless bloom of orchids under glass. Few notice the host at the head of the table, framed by light, smiling for his guests, eyes fixed somewhere they cannot follow. He owns everything he once dreamed of, but it no longer brings him joy. Not the marble halls, not the orchids under glass. The happiness he remembers most vividly is a dinner 30 years ago when he and Sally shared soup in a rented room, broke and laughing. The empire, it turns out, is quieter than poverty, and this private tragedy plants the seed of a larger one. The children watch as the house consumes their father. They see how rooms fill with artifacts instead of warmth, how invoices replace conversation. They see that objects matter more than people, and deep inside, a dangerous thought begins to form. This house isn't our inheritance. This house is Father, and when Father is gone, so is the need for the shell that held him. At the height of Henry Heinz's power, the future of his dynasty is already sabotaged. Green Lawn ceases to symbolize family unity. It becomes the architecture of emotional distance, a palace built for connection that produces only silence. The house demanded laughter, motion, and chaos, but received only ritual, memory, and restraint. The more Heinz tried to make it eternal, the more he condemned it to die. His heirs would never live in a mausoleum. They belonged to a century that looked forward, not back. May 14, 1919. Pittsburgh wakes to a new world. The war is over. The Spanish flu is retreating. Factories roar again. And in a second-floor bedroom of Green Lawn, Henry John Heinz fights a familiar enemy, pneumonia, the same disease that took Sally 25 years earlier. At 74, the man who built an empire on purity and health loses his final battle to the simplest thing in the world, the inability to draw breath. His death ripples through Pittsburgh like an aftershock. In the great hall of Green Lawn, under chandeliers that once gleamed for dinner parties, his coffin rests among mountains of lilies and orchids from his beloved greenhouses. Thousands pass through the gates to say goodbye. For a few hours, the mansion regains its purpose. It hosts its final triumph, a state funeral disguised as a home farewell. Then the carriages roll away, the guests disperse, and silence descends again. The mansion slips into a coma. Henry's will is generous: stocks, cash, detailed instructions for the company's future. But the inheritance his children dread most is the one they can't sell: Green Lawn itself. Howard Heinz is now the patriarch, 42 years old and molded by a different era. His father was a Victorian dreamer, a collector of symbols. Howard is a modernist, raised on ledgers and logic. Where Henry saw grandeur, Howard sees inefficiency. Where Henry saw legacy, Howard sees liability. He walks into his father's office and finds not a shrine, but a burden. The new decade brings new rules. Federal income tax cuts deep. Servants' wages rise. The cost of maintaining 30 rooms, 10 greenhouses, and an army of staff turns from prestige to punishment. Pittsburgh winters are brutal. Heating the palace devours tons of coal. Electricity, roof repairs, greenhouse maintenance, all of it adds up to a bleeding fortune. Green Lawn becomes a white elephant, sacred, untouchable, and ruinous. But the problem isn't only financial, it's psychological. Howard, Clifford, and Irene grew up in this house, but it never felt like theirs. Green Lawn was a temple built to worship their father, not a place to live. Staying would mean embalming themselves in his myth, curating his collections instead of writing their own lives. So a shift begins, a quiet revolution of values. Howard decides that Henry Heinz's true legacy isn't limestone and stained glass. It's ideas, integrity, charity, progress. The family starts dismantling the shrine. First, the collections, the clocks, the ivory carvings, the ancient relics, objects Henry guarded like fragments of his soul, are not auctioned, they are given away. The heirs donate them to the Carnegie Museum of Pittsburgh. It's a symbolic act. Private wealth turned public heritage. What once consoled a widower now belongs to a city. But one question remains: the building itself. In the early 1920s, the Heinz family makes one last attempt to save it. They offer green lawn to the city, free of charge. Take it, they say. Make it a museum, a library, a community center. The city's reply is short and final. The city says no. Officials scan the maintenance estimates and shake their heads. Green lawn is too far from downtown, too costly to heat, too massive to maintain. Even for free, no one wants it. The family turns to universities, to charities, hoping someone, anyone, will take it. But the answers are the same: too expensive, too impractical, too old-fashioned. The Gilded Age is over. The world now worships functionality, not fantasy. Victorian castles are no longer symbols of greatness. They're fossils. By 1923, Green Lawn stands abandoned. Servants dismissed, furniture draped in white sheets that hang like ghosts. The gardens Henry once inspected at dawn are wild and tangled. The greenhouses fog with neglect, their glass panes cracking one by one. Exotic plants, once nurtured by his careful hand, wither in the cold. The house dies slowly, like an empire collapsing from within. Howard Heinz faces the cruelest decision of his life: keep feeding a corpse or let it go. Spend a fortune maintaining an empty building out of guilt, or commit the unthinkable: destroy his father's masterpiece to save the family's future. He chooses the future, and that choice, far from betrayal, is transformation. Howard understands something his father never could: that wealth must serve the living, not the dead. He redefines the meaning of legacy. Instead of sinking millions into keeping one house alive, he will use that money to build something that will outlast them all. From that painful clarity comes an idea: the Heinz Memorial Chapel. A gift not for a family, but for a city. Not a mansion hidden behind iron gates, but a cathedral open to everyone, a hymn in stone and glass to beauty, faith, and knowledge. But before the new can rise, the old must fall. In early 1924, the documents are signed. The land is sold to developers under one condition: the site must be cleared. Green Lawn, the fortress Henry built to last forever, is declared construction waste. This is the climax of the story. The man who spent his life trying to bottle time now watches from eternity as time bottles him. Henry's tragedy, his loneliness, his attempt to buy immortality through architecture, collide with the one force that never bargains: progress. His children love him deeply, but they refuse to bear the weight of his obsessions. They choose freedom from the past. By mid-1924, Green Lawn is gone. Stone by stone, workers dismantle the palace with surgical precision. This isn't vandalism, it's a ritual, a careful unmaking. Newspapers barely mention it. Building materials sold: fine woodwork, imported marble, stained glass. Fragments of Henry's dreams scatter across Pennsylvania: oak panels in suburban parlors, marble fireplaces in homes of people who never heard his name. Green Lawn dissolves into 1,000 quiet afterlives. Surveyors mark the land where orchids once bloomed and a man once timed his mornings by pocket watch. Wooden stakes divide sacred acres into neat suburban lots. Soon, rows of modest homes rise where the great palace stood, solid, ordinary, and unremarkable. And the new owners, grilling in their backyards, have no idea that beneath their lawns lies the skeleton of one of America's grandest architectural tragedies. But the story doesn't end with ruin, it evolves. Howard Heinz turns destruction into creation. By freeing the legacy from its walls, he transforms his father's memory from stone to spirit. The funds that might have gone to endless repairs build something far greater. 14 years later, in 1938, the Heinz Memorial Chapel opens at the University of Pittsburgh. Neo-Gothic towers stretch toward the sky, stained glass blazes in the sunlight, the tallest in the world. And through that colored light, Henry and Sarah's values live again: education, beauty, faith. There is deep irony here. Henry Heinz built a private fortress to protect his family from the world. His true monument became a public sanctuary open to everyone. The chapel doesn't belong to the Heinz family. It belongs to the city, to its students, to its future. Its windows tell stories of courage and integrity. The faces resemble Henry and Sarah, but they no longer gaze out from shadow. They shine through glass illuminated by daylight. Howard was right. To make his father eternal, he had to set him free. Walk along Penn Avenue today and stop near 709. The mansion is gone, but if you look closely, you'll find its ghosts. The wrought iron fence still stands, black and solemn, stretching along the street like a scar marking where utopia ended and reality began. And deeper in the block, the old carriage house remains, a humble brick building where horses once slept, now a home for strangers who live unaware of the history beneath their floors. Only 2 relics remain, but their silence speaks volumes. The story of Green Lawn isn't about architecture. It's about the illusion of permanence. It mirrors the fate of countless Gilded Age palaces, monuments to ambition built by dreamers who mistook walls for immortality. Like Gatsby, Henry Heinz built his palace for love, and when that love vanished, the structure lost its meaning. He made the mistake so many visionaries make, believing that legacy can be poured into concrete and stone. But America moves. It doesn't inherit, it reinvents. And yet, Heinz did achieve immortality, just not the kind he expected. His truest monument isn't a mansion or a chapel. It's a glass bottle, octagonal, transparent, honest. A bottle that says, "I have nothing to hide." You'll find it everywhere, from New York to Tokyo. His name unchanged for a century and a half. The Heinz factory on the Allegheny River still stands, reborn as luxury lofts. People now live where his workers once bottled his dreams. The place where he earned his fortune proved more timeless than the palace where he spent it. History smiles at its own irony. Industrial function outlived aristocratic form. And if you ever stand by that old fence on Penn Avenue, listen closely. Through the noise of traffic, you might still hear it, the faint, uneven ticking of hundreds of clocks, counting the one thing Henry Heinz could never control: time.